Jean Renoir made his first film in 1924. By 1939, he had mastered the medium and achieved two great artistic and commercial successes, La Grande Illusion and Le Bête Humaine. Although the outbreak of a Second World War now seemed inevitable, Renoir seized this peak moment in his career to pursue an old dream. Brimming with ideas for his next film, he joined with his brother Claude and three other partners to form an independent production company, the NEF, La Nouvelle Édition Française, which would enable Renoir to make the films he wanted as he wanted. The first project would be, quote, a precise description of the bourgeoisie of our time, unquote. Casting proved difficult. Simon, the star of Le Bête Humaine, wavered about participating and demanded more money than the NEF could afford to pay. Taken to a play to see a young actress favored for the role of Christine de la Chesnaye, Renoir happened to meet a different actress among the members of the audience, an Austrian refugee named Nora Gregor, the Princess von Starrenburg. They conversed together easily in German, and Renoir became convinced that in this experienced actress he had found his Christine. His partners were shocked, for his princess was older than had been imagined for Christine, and she hardly spoke French. But Renoir would hear of no other. Additional casting changes that occurred included Marcel Delio, replacing Claude Dauphin as the Marquis Robert de la Chesnaye, and Gaston Modeau taking over from Fernand Ledoux as Schumacher, the gamekeeper. Renoir had always wanted to be an actor and decided to play the role of Octave himself. Though casting was incomplete, in mid-January of 1939, Renoir went to his country home in Marlotte, where he drafted a complete screenplay. In the first weeks of February, he wrote a shooting script, complete except for the film's conclusion. Renoir once said, quote, the sense of the characters and the action, and above all, the symbolic side of the film, that was something I had thought about for a long time, unquote. Shooting began in the studio on February the 22nd, with the interiors of Robert's Paris townhouse, as seen at the beginning of the film. On March the 6th, the company arrived in the hunting country of France, the Sologne, to shoot exteriors. First, the beautiful scenes on the grounds of Robert's country estate, and then the scenes at the Château de la Ferté-Saint-Aubin, which doubled as La Colonnière. But rain delayed the shooting for weeks. The actors sat on their hands. Renoir polished his script. Expenses mounted. On April the 11th, Renoir moved back to the studio, leaving a small crew to shoot the details of the hunt. Because of the delays, Renoir was forced to cut some scenes that he had planned, reduce others, and patch in new ones. Shooting finally finished in mid-June, 9.5 weeks over schedule, and well over the original budget. With everyone anxious about the results, Renoir's editor, Marguerite, raced to edit the film for exhibition. The Rules of the Game was edited to approximately 94 minutes for its Paris premiere on Friday, July the 7th, 1939. Overall, the film was a commercial disappointment. That first weekend, some members of the audience howled and whistled and set fire to newspapers in the theater. The theater managers demanded cuts. In desperation, Renoir had Marguerite watch the audience reactions and then cut the scenes that brought the loudest howls. By Sunday night, the film had been shortened to about 81 minutes, its integrity severely compromised. Years later, Renoir could say with a smile that, quote, the Rules of the Game had been an absolutely magnificent flop, unquote. But at the time, he was so crushed and dispirited that he thought he must either give up the cinema or leave France. In mid-July, he left for Rome to begin work on a new film. The successful La Bête Humaine had run in a big Paris theater for 4 months. The Rules of the Game, however, closed at the Colisée on the Champs-Élysées after 3 weeks, but played at the Aubert Palace through to the beginning of September, until the outbreak of war closed the Paris cinemas for a short period of time. The war also forced Renoir to return home from Italy and brought a ban on the Rules of the Game by the French government, which included it among films said to be demoralizing to the French nation. In 1940 and 41, the occupation authorities published lists of films deemed acceptable for viewing, none of which included the Rules of the Game. These lists were enforced for the duration of the war. Subsequently, the NEF production company went bankrupt and was dissolved. And in early 1941, Renoir and his second wife, Dido, arrived in Hollywood, leaving his film to its fate. In 1942, Allied bombers accidentally destroyed the GM film lab located on the outskirts of Paris, and with it, the negative of the rules of the game. At war's end, only some worn 81 or 94-minute prints remained. A new engagement in 1945 of the 81-minute version attracted a new audience, including Alain Resnais, a future director of the new generation of the late 1950s. Later in life, Resnais reflected, quote, "The rules of the game remains the single most overwhelming experience I have ever had in the cinema. For me, everything had been turned upside down. All my ideas about the cinema had been changed," unquote. For the next 10 years, the film's appeal continued to vary. It was shown occasionally in French cineclubs. It had an engagement in London in 1951, where it received some praise. However, at its New York debut engagement in 1950, a New York Times critic declared, quote, that it almost defies analysis and is, quote, one for the buzzards, unquote. And yet, in 1952, Britain's Sight and Sound magazine published its first top 10 film poll, and The Rules of the Game was listed as one of the 10 greatest films of all time. In 1958, two film enthusiasts, Jean Gabory and Jacques Maréchal, who owned Les Grands Films Classiques, acquired the rights to the film and over 200 cans of footage. They set out to restore the 94-minute version and along the way discovered material that had never before been screened. Bit by bit, shot by shot, Gabory and the film editor Jacques Durand created a film that had never previously existed, a version that was 12 minutes longer than the film that had premiered way back in July 1939. According to Gabory and Durand, when their final cut was screened for Renoir, the seasoned director was moved to tears, grateful that they'd taken an interest in a film that was once so harshly received by the critics. In 1959, 20 years after its initial production, this new, longer version of The Rules of the Game had its first public showing at the Venice Film Festival. Although it was not a version of the film that Renoir himself had put together, it is the version we still admire today. Hailed as a masterpiece, The Rules of the Game began to acquire its worldwide reputation. Still, it was not until 1965 that this new version had a commercial engagement in Paris, at last vindicating Jean Renoir's faith in his project, but much too late for his dream of independent production ever to be realized.